Hey everyone, my name's Adam, and today we are going to be talking about the destruction of Jerusalem that occurred in 70 AD. Now, for those of you who don't know, Jesus actually predicted this destruction around 30 AD. And about 40 years later, Titus came in and he destroyed the temple. So we actually have an authentic prophecy in Scripture, and we can prove it historically. It's a very fun discussion, and it's a very fascinating thing to talk about because we're actually looking at real prophecy. And in this video, I'm going to take you to the 3 gospel accounts that show us how Jesus predicted the destruction of Jerusalem that occurred in 70 AD. Hey, welcome to Scholar U. Be sure to click subscribe and the bell notification so you never miss a video. So today we are going to be talking about Jerusalem's destruction and how Jesus predicted it. Now there are 3 accounts that we have, which is Matthew's Gospel, Mark's Gospel, and Luke's Gospel. And we're going to be looking at all 3 of them today. And the way we're going to do it is we're actually going to put them side by side and look at them in detail. Because when we do this particular method of reading the Bible side by side, we're able to see stuff that we typically don't see when we just read one book at a time. Because when we put them side by side, we can compare them in detail. So that's what we're going to do today, and it's going to be very, very fun. Now, let me just tell you something really quickly. The Gospel of Mark was written around 70 CE, and the Gospel of Matthew and the Gospel of Luke were written around 80 to 85 CE. Now, I know that when you Google these books, when was the Gospel of Matthew written, or when was the Gospel of Mark written, or when was the Gospel of Luke written, you're going to get totally different dates. You're going to get earlier dates. Some people say they were written in the 50s. The reason why you're going to get different dates is very simple. Those are the church dates. In other words, that's the tradition that the church has gone with. It's a little bit different from what scholars have to say. And it's a very interesting conversation to be had, but we don't have time for that today. So just know that when you Google it, you're going to get a totally different answer than the one that I just gave you. But what it always comes down to is the evidence. And so what evidence is there to support an early date for the Gospels? Not a lot. And so that's why a lot of people say, well, they're probably later written Gospels, which is not bad, by the way. It's actually a very good thing. Because at the end of the day, we do have authentic prophecy in these Gospels. So Mark's Gospel was written around 70 CE, and it's probably the best Gospel that we have to tell us about who Jesus was, particularly in the Olivet Discourse. So let's go take a look at these passages and see how much we can learn just by glancing over them. We're going to be using Bible Gateway today because it's an easy website to use, and most likely you yourself are already familiar with it. So on the left side of your screen, we have Mark's Gospel, and in the center we have Matthew's Gospel, and on the right-hand side we have Luke's Gospel. And what's very interesting about these passages is that they are all very similar to one another. When we look here at the very first section, for example, it says that in Mark's Gospel, as Jesus was leaving the temple, one of his disciples came to him and said, "Look, what massive buildings, what great stones," or "what great massive stones, what magnificent buildings." And Jesus says, "You see this stuff? Not one stone will be left upon another. Every one will be thrown down." But that's Mark's Gospel. And here's what Matthew has to say. Jesus was leaving the temple and was walking away when his disciples came up to him and said, "Do you see these buildings, man?" He says, "Truly, I tell you, not one stone will be left upon another." Luke's Gospel is pretty similar, but a little bit different. Some of his disciples were remarking about how the temple was adorned with its beautiful stones and its gifts dedicated to God. But Jesus said, "As for what you see here, the time will come when not one stone will be left upon another. Every one will be thrown down." So all 3 of these accounts are talking about the same thing. They're talking about Jerusalem. We know they're talking about Jerusalem because it blatantly tells us they're talking about Jerusalem. And in fact, when we scroll down, it will talk about the abomination that causes desolation. And that's in Mark's Gospel, and it's in Matthew's Gospel. But what Luke does is something very interesting. He actually interprets the phrase for us and tells us what it means. Check it out. When we scroll down here to the abomination that causes desolation, we will find out something very interesting. So on the left-hand side of your screen, we have Mark's Gospel, and it says, when you see the abomination that causes desolation, standing where it does not belong, let the reader understand. This is from the prophet Daniel. Flee to the mountains. Those who are in Judea must flee to the mountains. Matthew's Gospel is pretty much saying the same exact thing. It says, so when you see in the holy place the abomination that causes desolation, spoken through the prophet Daniel, let the reader understand, and then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountaintops. So when you see Jerusalem being surrounded by armies, you know that its desolation is near. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. So what is Mark 13, Matthew 24, and Luke 21? The Olivet Discourse is what it's called. What is Jesus talking about? Well, he's talking about the destruction of Jerusalem. The abomination of desolation is talking about the desolation of Jerusalem, Jerusalem being destroyed. And this is actually how Luke interprets the prophecy, because Luke is actually writing after the fact, and he is not an eyewitness. Let me show you what I mean. When we scroll up to Luke's Gospel and we type in the very first chapter, he tells us exactly what he's up to. We see the introduction here, and it says, many have undertaken to draw up an account of the things that have been fulfilled among us, just as they were handed down to us by those whom from the beginning were eyewitnesses and servants of the word. With this in mind, since I myself have carefully investigated everything from the beginning, I too have decided to write an orderly account for you, so that you may know the certainty of the things that you have been taught. What is he telling us? Well, he's telling us up front that he, number one, is not an eyewitness. And number two, he's telling us that his information in the Gospel of Luke is actually coming from other books. So he knew about these other writings that talked about the apostles and Jesus. He read those writings. He says, I carefully investigated them. And after I read them and I investigated them, I wrote my own account based on the stuff that were in these books. So that's the Gospel of Luke. But there's a certain amount of interpretation that he's doing. He's not just taking this information and compiling one large source. He's compiling his book based on these other writings, and he's interpreting it. We know he's using Mark because he's quoting from Mark. We know he might be using Matthew as well because of the similar nature here that's going on. A lot of times scholars call this Markan priority. It's the idea that Mark's gospel was written first and then Matthew and Luke copied from Mark. The reason why this is because when you read Matthew, Mark, and Luke, the same way I just showed you how to read it side by side, you can compare these accounts in detail, and what you'll see is that they're copying one another, or they're word-for-word quotations. In other words, they're so similar to each other, like word-for-word similarities, that there's really no other way to explain it. Now, that's not to say there's not other theories out there. There are plenty of other theories. This is just one theory that a lot of scholars have kind of come to embrace. It's a very interesting concept, and I hope that it's one that you'll be able to learn and understand, and perhaps maybe one day you'll learn so much about Markan priority that you'll be able to read the Gospels this way and understand it in this particular way, because when you do, it really helps you see the beauty of the Gospels, and it really helps you understand who Jesus really was. Well, that's all for now, folks. Be sure to like this video and comment below. There's some more playlists up here if you want to go and check them out. Most importantly, when you click right here, you subscribe to the channel and you'll never miss a video. My name's Adam. Thanks for watching. And as always, I will see you in the next video.